Good morning. Got my coffee. Hope you have yours. Today, I want to talk a little bit more about those workshops because that's how I got to be here. When I first went, and it probably took maybe a year. For a year, I had to really practice thinking in my head because I mentioned that I had the most rare and severe form of autism. I didn't think in pictures like most people do with autism. I had no thoughts in my head. I did not think in my head. I did not know how to think on purpose. And I used to say that, well, how do you think on purpose? What are you doing? You know, I had no idea how to form thoughts in my brain because all my life there were no thoughts in my brain. I did not think in my head. Now, I mentioned my mom had said, well, she just sits in a room and talks to herself for hours on end because I didn't think in my head. There were no thoughts in my head. It was all verbal. And one of the things I remember is I went to one of those early workshops, and this person, she was another teacher, you know, and they had us do different exercises. And one of them was you talk to somebody who's standing next to you and you learn about them and then you introduce them. So this was my first experience with, communicating. And this woman was, she was a teacher. And so I said, well, how many students are in your class? I didn't know how to ask a question. I had never asked a question of anybody. And I had to ask her questions about herself. So I was like, well, how many students are in your class? And she looked up and she looked back at me and she answered my question. And I said, what did you do just now when you looked up? And she said, I was picturing my classroom and counting the desks so I could answer your question. I said, you did what? I was picturing my classroom and counted the desks so I could answer your question. How many students are in my class? I got so excited. Oh my God, that's how you think on purpose? That's how you do it? And I'm telling you, I felt like I just opened a treasure box. And I found all these wonderful treasures inside. Sorry. I immediately started forcing myself to think in pictures. I would take something like this and I would look at it and I'd close my eyes and force my brain to see that. Like I told you in the first workshop, that happened, but it didn't stay. I had to force myself to pull up an image and to see it. Really see it. And I began to do that. I would drive down the road and I would see a person's license plate and they would drive off and I would force my brain to pull up that license plate so I could see the image like that lady did in the workshop. And I had to do that. Well, I did it for a long time. And probably 2-3 years later, I found myself thinking in pictures all the time. Without trying. But it took a couple years for me to do that. And I had to work really hard to force my brain to pull up an image. Obviously, it's it is what it is, right? But that was the first step, I had to be able to think in pictures in order to grow forward. So it was quite an exciting ordeal, and it began, I think, with that workshop when they said you've got to ask questions. Well, I didn't know how to ask a question. You got to have some thoughts in your mind to ask a question, and I just didn't. But I'm loaded with questions now, so until next time, that's a wrap.